Hey guys, it is Esti and Justin from Not For Long Media.
If you like the video you're about to watch, be sure to like the video itself and subscribe to our channel. We really appreciate it.
Enjoy the video and also don't forget to follow us on our socials at Not For Long Media on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook.
All right, we got Thilo Kunkel in the building, a professor at Temple University, sports and tourism, hospitality, really involved in the sports business program, something that we've talked about here on here as well. But before we get into that, Thilo, how you doing today?
I'm fantastic. Thank you so much for having me on the podcast. I'm excited to catch up and talk all things NIL and athlete branding and all of the things where you got in store.
So when did we meet? It was a couple of years ago.
At a sport business conference at Temple.
There you go. Sports Business Conference at Temple, which is an unbelievable event. And the amount of connections I was able to make through that event was just awesome. It really is a great event.
I think it's really nice to have alum always come back, and I mean it's giving back from the alum to the students, because you shared your knowledge at the event, you shared what you're doing, and students love hearing from those who, not just those who are out and they're now 55 years old and a CEO and they've been like 30 years after graduation. No, it's like people love to hear the stories from those that graduated a few years ago. It's like, okay, I can see myself in those shoes. I can put myself, it's like, yeah, you had 30 years of experience as a CEO. Where does that lead me? That doesn't really tell the story. So I always enjoy and really appreciate alums coming back when they're still young and students can see themselves in those alums.
That's a great point, because there's a certain amount of stress and anxiety where, okay, where's this going to take me? What happens when I hit a roadblock? Because I know I'm going to hit one. And then to hear from someone like, I've hit a ton of roadblocks in the business. I've hit a ton of roadblocks with my first job playing football and burst through a couple of those. Here I am now, and then unbelievably humbling, and it's an unbelievable experience playing the NFL. And then personally with media and branding, and that's constantly evolving. So it was a great day. I really appreciate you guys having me. So again, there's so much going on in the world of sports business right now, more now than ever. Let's go back to where this all started for you. When did you get your first kind of taste of sports business and you're like, you know what, I really want to go down this avenue, because now I'm a professor at one of the best universities in all of the country when it comes to just business and sports and the combination, and being in Philadelphia, an unbelievable top 5 sports market. When did you get that first whiff to where here you are now at Temple?
That's a long way back. I actually studied sports science, physical education, and in Germany, and I loved the sport part. I loved the sports science part. But in order to finance my degree and make some money on the side, I had my own promotional company where we ran marketing, promotion, giveaways for what I call lifestyle brands, aka we promoted booze and liquor at sport events, and we activated and work with brands, whether it's Bailey's or Carlsberg, or launching new products. So we work with Red Bull, and I really enjoyed the business side of that. So I'm like, well, sports science is interesting, but that business side, that gets me really hooked, and it actually pays the bills as well. So I'm like, I need to learn more. So then shifted. I finished the sports science part, but then I shifted also into studying business. And then after graduating, I'm like, I really like that, and I love the combination of those two. So I want to learn more. And that's when I moved and got my PhD in sport business. I moved to Australia, lived there for 5 years, and really got drenched with the sport industry there as well, but focused on my PhD. And then once I graduated in Australia, Temple, few people that I now work with, I met them at conferences. As we met at a conference, I met them at a conference, and they're like, "Well, we know that you are graduating soon. How about you apply to Temple?" I'm like, "It's cold in Philadelphia, isn't it?" And they're like, "No, it's always nice here." And so The
Always
Temple
sunny.
brand actually hooked me in, as in, yeah, it's a good, as you said, it's a good program. It's a really good sport business program. So I came here. I never thought I'd stay that long. I figured, like 2 or 3 years, get that experience in Philadelphia, work with some teams here, and get that North American experience, and then bugger off, go to Europe or go back to Australia. But 8 years later, I'm still here, and I really enjoy it at Temple and in Philadelphia.
Yeah, it is a
So it
phenomenal
worked out
place.
really well.
Yeah, excuse me. Yeah, it is a great place, and it's an awesome city when it comes to all the things we're talking about. Again, sports business, the success of the sports franchises too, on and off the field, branding wise, the opportunities. All right, so I don't want to skip over this though. Germany, Australia, Philadelphia. What do you bring with you from those countries to now your classroom?
I think a lot of international experiences and examples where our students really don't hear about them normally. So every now and then I talk about surfing in Australia, I talk about cricket, I talk about European soccer. And actually a lot of our students are getting more and more interested in those overseas sport leagues, particularly European soccer. They come over, but they watch the EPL, but the business side around it is so different than it is over here. Promotion, relegation, and now a lot of sport teams in Europe now being used for political positioning of countries. We see Qatar, and we see Emirates. We see big investments being made in European sport clubs, and it's for political gain. So how sport is being used as a vehicle to position a country. So those are some of the examples that I then bring in, and students are like, oh, that's different to college sport, and that's really, I think, where what some students like. Some students are like, well, that's not what I'm here for. I really don't want to talk about Alabama football right now. I'm like, yeah, I'm the wrong guy for that. So
Yeah.
you can do that in another class. So I think it's some people you can really inspire with that background, and some people it's just not their jam. As with everything, right?
No doubt. No doubt about it. I'm sure people are like, yes, we got Thilo today. Like, we're going to talk about whatever that may be. Now, let's dive into this a little bit. Do you watch Ted Lasso?
I have watched Ted Lasso. The first season, I haven't made it past the first one, but it was good.
Wow. Just good. I appreciate your honesty, by the way. It's good.
It's sometimes a bit too heartfelt and a bit too obvious. I want more of the dirty side of the sport business, because it can be dirty. I want more of that. I want more realism.
Yeah. Do you
But-
watch that show and see things like, okay, business opportunity here. This is what so-and-so did here to take advantage of this or to do X, Y, and Z. Does your mind race when you see a show like that?
Partly, yes. My mind goes. The job has somewhat ruined watching sport in general a little bit for the enjoyment. So, I work with some organizations that I work with them, help them improve their events or help them improve their services, how to improve the customer experience and all of those aspects. And I go to the event and I still enjoy the event, but I always look for that. How could we make this better? What's the angle here? What's the user experience? And like, I could take this shortcut because I'm invited. I got a VIP ticket here, but let me stand in line with all the others for the next half an hour and see how frustrated I get. So it's sometimes a little bit along those lines where I'm like, this used to be more fun. But it's also, I get these amazing experience. I get all of this behind the scenes, all of that behind the scenes access and insights. And I give you an example. I was working at the NBA All-Star game, and we looked at the user experience at the All-Star game. As 2 years ago, and so we had these all behind the scenes access cards, and my colleague was like, you know what? It was just the warm up, and the women's national basketball team was shooting. They were having a practice session, halftime of the practice session, and my colleague's like, "I dare you to go on the field, on the court in halftime. Just pretend you belong." And we had really good seats, so I'm like, you know what? Let's bet a coffee on it. And so he's like, "All right, let's bet a coffee." So I got my shot. I just walked on the court. I got my shot on the court, and so I won that coffee. And it's just like, oh yeah, I walked on the court where the women's national basketball team was just playing like a minute ago, and it's still hanging out here. So I mean, those experiences also pretty awesome. So I take the good and the bad with it.
That's a great point. I think for me, if you want to flip it to the football side, when I didn't really know a lot about the game of football, and I thought I did at a maybe high school level or at a college level, I watched the games and I enjoyed it a different way. It was more of a fandom based. Now I watch the games and enjoy it in a schematic based way. And then I challenge people I'm with to watch it the same way, which is always a challenge, right? Like for yourself, you're going to an event with somebody, say you go to a Temple basketball game.
Yeah.
And you may see things you're looking at, you watch the game, sure, but you're watching things completely different, which adds a whole different dynamic to it.
And I'm sure that we would be looking for different things. Obviously, you'd be probably more. Are you more looking for the tactical side? Are you looking for? Oh, when sport fans are saying, "Oh, that's a big hit. It's awesome." You're like, "Oh, I hope those guys are all right."
Yeah. Or I'm talking about the guy who didn't hustle to make the block, which got his teammate hit really hard. Right? Like that's where I'm at with it. Like, don't let that happen, right? Don't put that on film. So no, it's unique, and I wanted to hear your thoughts on it because it's there's so much inside the business of sports that intrigues me. It was funny, we were in Minnesota, and last year during COVID, there's no fans in the stands, and again, the stadium was extremely quiet, very weird. And again, in Carolina, we had a couple thousand fans here and there, but Minnesota, nobody. It was indoors. And I looked around, and it was Land O'Lakes Butter, Polaris, and Coors Light were their massive sponsors. And I was like, sounds about right for what for where we are.
Yep.
What's the thoughts behind that? What's the marketing behind that? What's the tactic behind that and the branding?
No, I think it's exciting to see what like the different brand positioning of the different regions, and what you just mentioned Coors Light, as in one big push that we see in Europe and Australia is to ban alcohol sponsorship from stadiums and from sports. So the rugby tournament, the Heineken Cup, that is played all over Europe, is now named the H Cup in France because France forbids alcohol sponsorship. Australia is pushing for that. And
what's the push for? Why is there a push?
Because the sport appeals to a vulnerable audience, particularly kids. And if you look at the negative sides of alcohol, I think it's quite comparable to tobacco. And if we're thinking about it now, then it's like, oh, you see smoking and smoking's or tobacco sponsorship at the stadium. People are like, no, hell no. I was like, well, what about Coors Light? Yeah, that belongs to football. But does it? So, and don't get me wrong, I enjoy a good beer. I'm not talking about a Coors Light. I enjoy a good beer at the stadium myself. Maybe 2, maybe 3.
Yeah.
So I'm not someone who's, but I'm also saying it's like, well, if we think about the negative effects of alcohol, particularly vulnerable populations, that's something as in how is sport really exploiting their position, and is that something we should be looking at? And we see now big cryptocurrency companies pushing into. We see the betting now being legal. Now betting has been legal for so many years in Europe. So when I remember when I was in college, I used to bet on the Bundesliga games, and I'm like, yeah, Bayern win, that's an easy one. And then Bayern lost. I'm like, oh, damn it. but Europeans have had the B-Win sponsorships all over the European teams. But now the Italian league has just banned betting sponsorships. to be used in sports. So again, this is pushing into that. How are we using sport to address vulnerable populations?
Where's the morals, right? Just write that down about, okay, so we're gonna nix tobacco, obvious reasons. Okay, we're gonna nix booze. Well, there's a pushback. I enjoy beer as well, but for obvious reasons, you would say, is it equivalent? Are there? Yeah. So then, okay, flip it now to the latest thing in sports, gambling. Obvious reasons, there's negative things to addiction to all 3, 4, 5, whatever substance they may be. What? Okay, so say,
and let me add one more: fast food, McDonald's, KFC, Burger King. Like all of the, excuse my language, all of the shit ingredients that are in there, that's not helpful either. Now,
what about
what's
behind
the role
you?
of sport?
What stadium is behind you?
That's the Philadelphia Union Stadium.
Well, I see a Coca-Cola sponsorship there.
Exactly. So right now it's like, okay, well, like fast food isn't good. That's a vulnerable population. But where do we end? Right? It's almost that's also that question, as in, well, where do we draw the line? Because obviously these sport organizations, these are some of their biggest sponsors.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's interesting. I will watch out for that now. I'm sure a lot of our listeners will be watching for that now. I'm a big Tottenham Hotspurs fan. I've become one over the last 8 months, 9 months.
Okay.
I've told the story on here a few times now, but essentially had some friends when I was down in Key West, Florida. I bumped into 3 people, 3 straight days. I was looking for a Premier League team, and it was ideal at the time. So I jumped on. My friend was a huge Liverpool fan. I did not want to be a Liverpool fan. They just won it, right? You didn't want to come in on top, but it was fun for me to pick, because everywhere else I've been, it's like, okay, I'm a Flyers fan. I'm wearing the hat. It's where I'm from. But to be able to pick Tottenham, I'm excited. I support them. It's been fun. Now, sponsorship wise, I'm learning more about the Premier League. Like Liverpool used to be sponsored by Carlsberg. I mean, can they do that anymore? That's all Europe. Is that banned in Europe?
No, that's just France. That's just France. And I think Ireland is pushing for it as well. So it's country specific.
And that's massive brands in Ireland, beer, i.e. Guinness.
Yep.
Wow.
Yeah. So, and it's also, as I said, Heineken is a sponsor of that cup, of that rugby competition. And they obviously they need to reframe all of the commercials, all of the announcement in one of their countries as the H Cup. So it's just an interesting development.
Wow. Well, it won't affect viewership per se. Will that money bleed back into the sponsorship? Maybe let me phrase it this way: is the program or the what's the term? Yeah, the program, like the Tottenham or a Premier League team, are they going to be worth less because their biggest sponsor of Guinness or Bud Light or Coors Light that gives them millions a year disappeared? Or you know what? There's a line a mile long of people that are willing to write that check.
I think there are some others still. Yeah, like particular, like that void has been now filled with some cryptocurrency companies.
Yeah.
Like there's always the next thing.
Yeah.
But obviously, once tobacco was not allowed to be sponsoring anymore, a lot of these sport teams have taken a hit, and a lot of these sport teams are taking a hit when big booze companies or big alcohol companies are not allowed to be engaged in it anymore. Certainly, sponsorship is a big part of it. Now, with the Premier League's probably a little bit different because their most of their revenue really is derived from TV audiences and media rights. But I think once you trickle down, once you go to like a League 2, League 3, you really drop down in the ranks. It's like, well, you have that local brewery that really wants to get in front of a few fans. Well, you're not allowed to do that anymore. Well, they don't have the TV deals to compensate with that. Where's that money coming from? So there's certainly more. I think looking at the top tier, this is what we always see immediately. But I think the effects are much more felt at the lower league impact.
Interesting stuff. It really is. I'm looking forward to keeping track of when it's going to come over to the States, because there'll be a push for it. The world we live in today, there's movements that get behind things, right? You talk about brands, talk about enhancing brands, ruining a brand. There'll be a movement behind it if it's a lot of people who are passionate about it. It should be interesting to track. We'll see if it finds its way to the States. I want to transition now to what you're doing in the classroom. Again, you're at the at Temple. You're involved with sports tourism, hospitality, sports business, sports management. What courses are you teaching right now, and what are some of the main topics you're going over?
So I teach this year, I teach strategic management, how to position an organization for future success. Very broad, but I feel I'm very passionate about it because it's a little bit of everything. A little bit of finance, a little bit of marketing, a little bit of management, a little bit of human resources, and looking at the market. So looking at a big picture, how can we really make sure our organization is still relevant in 10 years? The other class is current and ethical issues. So exactly what we just talked about, like anything that's happening in the marketplace, alcohol sponsorship, or what are the ethical ramifications of name, image, and likeness? What are some of the we've just seen the sexual harassment issues that have been unearthed in the National Women's Soccer League. So basically taking anything that's current and making it relevant to our students and getting the key takeaways from that. I love that class because it keeps me up to date, it keeps me on my toes, and those are really uncomfortable conversations sometimes, but they really need to be had. And what I'm really excited about is a new class, Name, Image, and Likeness, starting next week. 7-week intensive course, and that is really focused on building a personal brand and then monetizing that personal brand. It's a big overview, and next year we're launching, and this is basically the step 1 of a new certificate that we're creating that's focused particularly on name, image, and likeness. So step 2 next year, I'm gonna roll out a class that's really focused on monetization and personal finance. And we've also, right now this semester, I'm really busy this semester, where I am overseeing a class that is taught by 4 instructors from the Resnick Center, our Center for Student Development, that is doing an awesome job in keeping student athletes afloat and really supporting them. And in that class, we are also focusing on name, image, and likeness. So it's really a big overview, and it's only for it's for student athletes that are freshmen at the university. So it's basically a welcome to Temple. There's this new thing. It's don't get overwhelmed. We're gonna basically take you and walk you through this.
That's incredible. I appreciate you taking us through all that stuff. It's become a passion of mine. Like I said, the sports side of business, building a brand, monetizing a personal brand. We had Darren Heitner on, who is who you know about, I'm sure. He's like Mr. Sports Law, NIL. He helped push it through in the state of Florida. If you guys missed that episode, check it out a few back from Thilo's here, because Darren, again, gave the lawyer's perspective. Now we're giving someone who's, an advocate for it, obviously a professor at a big university in a big sports city. So NIL, I don't even know where to go with this because there's so many onions, right? There's so many layers of this onion where we pull it back. What's the topic that you're going through right now with students, with professors, the talk around campus? What's the latest trend in NIL that's on the docket?
Let's start with, it all starts with basic human rights, as in this is your name, image, and likeness. You should be able to make money off that. This is yours. You should be able to exploit that. And the NCAA has prevented that for years. So I'm very glad that that's not the case anymore. Now that's opened the floodgates for, student athletes around the nation that have gathered a really strong personal brand, lots of followers. They are like, well, hell yeah, let me make some money of that. And there are sponsorship deals thrown around left, right, and center, which is awesome because the money floods into the market and helps those student athletes. It's a lot less money most of the time than people think it is. So most of the deals, they're under $100. They are, but you know what? $100 here and there, that's better than nothing. So it keeps people afloat in a way. And it's also teaching them some business skills. Now these student athletes that, as I said, in our class, we're looking at, okay, how do you build your personal brand? That's a first step. But then, okay, well, once you start monetizing it, what do you do with the money? As in, have you thought about taxes? How are you signing those deals? What type of legal aspects do you need to consider? So those are all of the things that I'm trying to raise awareness around. And I don't want to do it in a way that, oh, you shouldn't be doing this, because most deals can be beneficial. I want to basically raise awareness around, it's like, think about the next steps, that what you're going to do with the money, and think about the long-term impact. A $10, $15, $20 sponsorship deal now sounds like, hey, that's a great opportunity. Or a $200 sponsorship deal sounds great short-term, but if that means you are associated with a company that you don't want to be associated with long-term, that's not a smart investment on your personal behalf. If a specific NIL deal now means that you're missing practice, or you're not putting as much time in your sporting career as you should be because you're now doing some funny TikTok dances instead of grinding it out on the field, that's not strategic, because most scholarships far exceeds the value of the NIL deals that are happening right now for most people. And I've published a research paper on NIL, the social media value of student athletes, and we've shown that for the majority of the student athletes, the scholarship value far exceeds the NIL value. So when we think strategic and long-term, yes, get involved, yes, learn from it, build that business acumen, really dive deep and try to understand, because that's really what a student athlete should be doing anyway. That student part, as in you learn about business, you learn about finance, great, because that prepares you for the future. But also think long-term and think about what's your main goal and what's your main responsibility, and that's still performing on the field, because if that's not happening, you're going to get cut. You have to drop. You're now going from D1 to D2. Yeah, you may have $50 more in the bank, and you have 10 and a half Instagram followers more, but you know what? In the end of the day, that $30,000 scholarship that you had is now gone. So it's really about taking a strategic approach to NIL and branding. What I find really exciting though is that these student athletes, they're now thinking about it when they're in college. That means when they go for a draft, if they go pro, one of our research projects looked at the impact of the draft on their personal brand of these athletes that are getting drafted. And obviously the number of drafts and all of those. One of the biggest impact factors in order to gain new followers during the draft was the size of your market that you had before the draft, the size of your following that you have created before. Because we have these networking effects, people get involved, they share, they retweet, they get engaged, they like. That helps with the algorithm building. So what I find exciting is now that these student athletes are getting involved with building their personal brand way before they hit the NFL. So they're coming in with 10, 15, 20,000 followers that they've built through that really tight-knit brand community at the university. And they are in a much better position than those athletes 10, even 5 or even 3 years ago when they go pro. Because they have that business acumen and they have the network and the following already.
So there's a lot of aspects of that. First off, I want to touch on...
Sorry.
No, you're good. I love that. That was unbelievable. Keep it rolling, man. That was spectacular. I want to touch on though what you just touched on. So you're talking about how it impacts the athlete, but not financially, how it prepares them to be a pro. Let me flip it this side. My biggest concern with all this, and it's been my concern with everything, not everything. It's been my concern when I became a college athlete and had, lucky enough to have two parents that are, financially savvy or, business owners, entrepreneurs, and then have we work with Wealth Advisory Services on here. They're a financial company that I've been able to work with, and they've helped me with finances and education behind that. I have friends that are lawyers that I can send contracts to.
That's
massive, right? Like I'm so lucky to have that. And that's not like a braggadocious thing. That's like, I'm just so fortunate. Like I've been able to connect with these people over the years. And then again, unbelievable parents that like made ultimate sacrifice for me to be able to have those things. But like most college athletes don't have those. And then is a university supporting those athletes? That was my number one thing when I talked to, we had Anthony Russo on, former Temple quarterback. He's in Michigan State. He was on last week. You know, what do you have at Michigan State? Do you have lawyers you can talk to? Do you have financial advisors you can talk to? When I was talking, we're going to have a not for long media athlete here sponsored, just like a Barstool athlete, just like a whatever athlete. And I'm talking to that person. They're like, yeah, draw up a contract, but we have to show our team lawyer. What are your thoughts on that? Again, these are things preparing people for life, which is awesome. Maybe they'll make a couple bucks, but like you said, they'll have the feather in the cap and the confidence to make those decisions, which to me, that's what it's all about. And they should be getting anyway without this NIL stuff.
No, I absolutely agree. In terms of the business acumen that these student athletes are generating, it's really helpful because now they're getting involved with contracts, they're getting involved with sponsorship deals that while the university support system is still in place. Before they would go pro, and let's say a women's volleyball player that has been building a personal brand before, but they're not making the millions coming out of college. Like, you know, let's say they signed a contract of $15,000 for playing pro, and they wanted to get a local sponsor in, signing for $3,000 annual for a few shout outs, etc. Well, in the past, they would graduate and then they would be able to do this. Now, because they've graduated, there wasn't that support system anymore from the university. It's like, now I need access to financial advisor. Now I need access to the lawyers to actually review that. Well, you graduated. We're sorry. We're not responsible anymore. Whereas this is really happening now, and the universities, as you say, they do have a responsibility to really help and support their student athletes, and they're taken care of. I know Temple, particularly, as I said, the Resnick Center, they're doing an awesome job there. We're rolling out, as I said, these classes. We're rolling out NIL overview. We're rolling out that monetization and personal finance course. We want to get into content creation and all of those. So once these student athletes graduate, they should be really well versed to manage their own personal brand and either do it themselves or say, you know what, I have enough knowledge to hire the right person. So then whatever they are trying to sell me, as you said, you have a good financial advisor, that's awesome. I know there's a lot of financial advisors that are not so awesome out there. So if they don't want to manage it themselves, at least they have the education on evaluating whether it's a good partner or not. So I think that's a really exciting part of that support.
Yeah, knowledge is power. And it seems like now the power is going back. Obviously, the power is to the player now, power is to the athlete because of NIL, because of what the NCAA has done. Really, what they have done, it's what they've responded to because of the push and the blowback that they got. And they finally just said, yeah, you're right. This is a basic human right, like you said before. But knowledge is power. So to me, it's like, I'm an athlete. Let me accumulate a following. Let me find a way to do that. Let me find a way to align myself with brands. Yeah, sure. Maybe I'm going to put a couple bucks in my pocket, but I don't wait to capitalize to make the right move at the right time when I'm at my highest value. Are you seeing that with athletes now? Or are you seeing a lot of people that are just like early on, like, hey, give me everything, give me all this product, right? And now it's like, well, here I am, and it's not, I didn't really learn a ton. Are you seeing athletes learning, gathering information, and taking it to the next level?
I see a little bit of both. I mean, you see basically the whole spectrum from, let me hold on and wait and see what's going on. Let me fully prepare to let me make sure I know everything before I jump in, to, yep, left, right, and center, let's go. And people signing away rights for basically the future, and companies are able to promote the same picture and the same name, image, and likeness in 10 years. I'm like, people have even signed away their logos and the pictures with their logos of the university, which they're not even allowed to do, but they've done it. And so we see the full spectrum. So that's part of I'm not saying at Temple, but in general, we
Yeah.
see the whole range here. Now, as part of Sporter, so the company that I have been founded, so I've founded is it's the app where we're helping people actually brand themselves in a positive light, where we basically work with the student, particular student athletes that are coming, and we're like, okay, well, what have you done? What causes? What are you passionate about? What causes you support? What are you doing in the community? Let us help highlight those aspects, and then we give them some guidance on what can you charge for a sponsorship deal? What can you charge for an in-person experience or a virtual experience that they're selling? And we help them on the app because, well, it's good for us, because if they do good business through us, that's always beneficial, because it word of mouth, and it's helping them as well. And we see that athletes are really, I think most athletes are taking that longer term approach, as in, I don't want to just jump in with both feet, but I think most are looking at it in a more strategic way, which I think is great.
Yeah, it's being handled different ways, and you can see it all now on social media. Not all of it, of course, but you see a lot of it, and it's been unique. And again, as someone who's in professional sports looking at it, I've learned a ton. Like, well, maybe do I want to be a Barstool athlete? A lot of these other people want to be a Barstool athlete. What's the contract look like? So a lot of unique things with that. Check it out, guys. It's Sporter app, Sporter, Sporter, and that's something that we've been trying to do. I need to get on, and we've talked about before, but as we know, the world passed you by, and here we are now. And I'm like, yeah, I was preparing for the interview today. I'm like, it's time to get back on and get back working. I wish I would have done it 2 years ago when we met. So, okay, NIL wise, what's been the bigger shocker for you? What's been the biggest, not shocker, I'm sure you can predict some of the things that were going to happen, or you could say, I thought X, Y, and Z would happen, but maybe not to this extreme. Something you didn't expect to happen in the landscape of NIL and college athletics.
So a few unique things are happening right now that I find really interesting. One, I predict that most bigger term contracts that are signed right now are far exceeding the actual value that the athlete is delivering. Because right now what the company is doing, they are paying for the enhanced media value. So because a lot of the mainstream media, because NIL is so new, all of the mainstream media, they're jumping in, it's newsworthy, there's another big deal, there's a sponsorship deal, there's an alcohol sponsorship deal, everything's blowing up. These companies are getting massive value based on the media amplification. So in a few months, maybe in a year, etc., I think that value declines because the mainstream interest is going to decrease, the mainstream media amplification is decreasing. So I think we see a little bit, I don't want to say the 90s .com bubble, but we see a little bit of a bubble in terms of valuation.
It's very interesting you say that. Very interesting you say that, because right, there was such a push around NIL, and it wasn't the story that, hey, these kids, it wasn't a story about, hey, they working with, I always use Barstool because they're, the most public with it, Barstool or this company or Nike or whatever it may be. Cherry Bundy, I love the company. I just chugged one, right? Whatever that may be. So now, but the more the story was the news coverage of the fact that now college athletes can take money. Yeah. Right? College athletes can get paid and give a service back of their social media or their time or photos or whatever it may be. That's been the story, really not been what's going on. I think it's been pretty mellow. I thought this was going to continue. Like you said, the bubble was going to stay high, but it really was like, oh, here's the bubble. Okay. It's booming. There's so much going on. There's social media. It's everywhere you look. And then all of a sudden football season starts and it just seems like a normal football season.
And that's the thing. It's like, you as a professional athlete, if in a 100-man roster on NFL roster, not just, a student athlete at a university, it's like, no, NFL, the highest level. There are at least 5 guys on your team that are probably not even having sponsorship or a really low paid sponsor. Where like, that student athlete got that much money? Like my colleagues, my teammates that are playing NFL that have more followers, more engagement, etc. they don't get those sponsorship deals. So I think we see some of that happening right now, and it's an interesting market, and yeah, we'll see where that goes. So that's one of my observations there.
That's an interesting observation. I think, okay, so let's say 53 guys are on the NFL roster, and then 10 more on the practice squad, 15, I think. So, just say maybe some practice squad guys are. Let's just keep the practice squad out of it. 53 guys on the active roster. If I had to take a guess of how many guys receive money for their name, image, and likeness. Now, I have sponsors on the podcast, right? So that's a different thing. This is through a different revenue. This is doing different work, again, along with football, paired with it. But we can talk about that too, if any athletes who have a podcast they've started, because that's a nice way to create business, create value. But that's something we'll get into next. I would say this. Let's see. Guys that actually make money off their NIL in the NFL, on an NFL roster, I would say 20, maybe out of 53, 20. Let's say a little bit more. Let's say 25. Half the roster, give or take, makes actual money, not product, money.
Yep.
Does that number shock you?
It doesn't, but we see that most of them will probably have much more followers, more engagement, and that's why I say a lot of these student athletes are getting paid now not for their value, as in their value, but because it's so new and the media amplifies those deals. So these companies are really banking on that media amplification, which brings me to my second observation, is these umbrella deals. Right? You've seen an umbrella deal in Michigan State, maybe even? Yeah, I think Michigan State has signed this umbrella deal that pays all men's basketball and all football players $500 a month.
Great deal. That sounds good to me.
I mean, if you're a student athlete and you're like, what do I do? Yeah, you do some social media shout outs. Okay, I'll do that. Now, the question is, again, they are getting a lot of attention from the media for that nationwide. So, the third string linebacker who has 200 followers and a private Instagram account, what are they contributing to this? Not much. What's a quarterback? We're talking Russo right now, former Tampa guy. What is he contributing? Much more.
Much more.
So we'll see some of these. It's almost a socialistic, which is ironic because America is a capitalistic country, but it's almost a socialistic approach to name, image, and likeness. And to me, that's an interesting aspect. As in, well, you're the quarterback and you have 70,000 followers. You have much more name, image, and likeness value than someone who has 207 followers who is never actually seen on TV, but you're on a weekly basis. How does it make you feel? Well, should you sign that? Could you make more? Probably. Is that linebacker, are they unhappy if you don't sign because then the whole deal doesn't get signed? Probably. Are they gonna not pay attention in one of those games? I'm not saying they won't, but I'm saying team dynamics is really interesting in those type of umbrella deals. So that's one thing that I'm working right now with one of my doctoral students, as in what's that whole situation looking like in these umbrella deals. So it's pretty interesting.
It is. Again, I love this conversation. We could go all day. This has been the fastest 45 minutes I've ever done. As we wrap things up here, what is the impact on football, the money maker, the revenue maker, right, for the university, but also, right, they will do better because it's more of a public sport, have on a campus, have on really the athlete in general when it comes to marketability? What's those conversations like with maybe a soccer player to a football player?
I think even at the football player level, let's leave out these umbrella deals, at the football player level, even though they are, they're the campus stars, but unless they really work hard, they don't just build a personal brand overnight. So even if you're a part of a football team, you really still need to put a lot of effort in building that personal brand, and it doesn't just come to you. So someone who is a soccer player, someone who is a volleyball player, we see different sports. They, particularly if your content is really visual. So as a football player, you always have the helmet, right? You don't have that name, image, and likeness. Like, well, that image is a helmet where you don't see anyone. You don't see the face, particularly in those cool action shots that you want to promote. So as a soccer player, that's different. As a volleyball player, that's different. As a gymnast, that's very different. So I think the discussion around that is interesting. Now, what I think is happening right now as well for the athletics department, obviously it costs more, right? We're running some name, image, and likeness classes. We are now having a lot more oversight in terms of making sure that these programs are signed, that it's all legal, it's all compliant. It's like, that's a lot of money. Where's that money coming from? Donors? Somewhere else? The other aspect that I think is interesting is that if I'm a company and I was sponsoring the athletics program for years, now I have options to reach the same target market. Maybe more engaging, maybe more targeted, a lot cheaper for sure, and probably with a lot more innovation than what I had in the past. So maybe I don't renew my sponsorship for the athletics department. So the athletics departments that have been selling that audience, that student audience of their campus, are now facing competition from their own athletes that are selling the same type of audience in a way.
I love it, man. There's so, it's just so, I wish I would have taken your class at the Temple. I went a different route, you know, pre-graduation, post-graduation, you know, different things. And I didn't know what I want to do, but I would be all in on your classes now. As we wrap things up, what's next for NIL? And then your floor to address anything that you think needs to be shared that we haven't covered today.
What's next for NIL? I think the progression from, I think a lot of professionals are now seeing increased competition from college, and they need to step up their game as well. So we're talking about NIL and student athletes, and I was like, yeah, but there's now a lot of competition coming into the pros, right? It's like, yeah, it used to be the top 20 per team that are getting these money deals. I'm like, well, now I can also sponsor the college team. Maybe it's only the top 15 from here onwards. So I think professional athletes also now need to consider thinking about, how do I step up my game in terms of personal brand development. I'm always open to chat further on those things. I'm super interested in this. But I think that is one area that we don't really think about at the moment as we think NIL student athletes. What's there coming? I think we will see a lot of tax implications once taxes hit, and we'll see a lot of interesting stories around that down the road. And we'll hear a lot of sobbing stories for those that haven't prepared.
Take care of your taxes, kids.
Yes, so I think it's exciting to watch from the sidelines. It's exciting for me to be able to contribute to some of that knowledge generation at Temple. It's really excited to me with a Sporter, because we just launched a new product feature, which is signed pictures, virtual signed pictures on the app, that we also want to turn into NFTs. So NFTs is another way of those. How do I make money? So being part of the industry as well on that side, it's really exciting, and seeing some of the development on that side. So it's exciting to witness on the sidelines. It's exciting to be contributing in terms of education. It's exciting to be in the mix. So all of those three, I think we'll see a lot. I think we'll learn a lot. It's an awesome case study. I want to see more on, and want to hear more from the professional side. So I hope we can connect, maybe even offline on this, and see how we can loop some of that knowledge back into my classes as well.
Love to. Got to check out the Sporter app, guys. Again, that's Sporter, SPRTER. I can't wait to join. brand development. We talked about this before. Again, you were just starting it then, I believe, at the time, and really excited to be a part of it. Really am. And everyone's got to check it out. Everyone check out Thilo Kunkel all over social media. Love what you do. Love what you post. And a case study is the right way to put it, because you were living in it literally on a campus. You get to see it. You get to talk about it with different students, and then you get to talk about it with the student athletes, other professors, coaches, administration. So can't thank you so much for your time today, Thilo. We look forward to having you back on probably next year. The new year's coming close. So we appreciate you joining us, man, and best of luck with your classes moving forward.
Thanks for having me. That was awesome. I really enjoyed insightful questions and that conversation. It was great to be on here and chat NIL. Anyone who's interested in chatting further, I'm always happy to engage and connect. Thanks for having me.
Thank you, man. We appreciate it.